I love it. And you know what? That makes me think of Eartha Kitt as Catwoman in the 1960s. And some of her songs, she loved to have that little trill with that. I can't do it, but he did it so wonderfully. Totally made us know exactly what that sound was. Thank you very much. Our next teller comes to us from Oklahoma. Yes, the Texas Storytellers does have a group out in Oklahoma. And Chester Weems is an Oklahoma storyteller and a member of the Territory Tellers. He's also Tejas Storytelling Association member and with the San Antonio Storytellers Association. He performs a variety of stories, including personal tales from his family and other families, and his own tales. He prefers nonfiction stories, though occasionally has been known to enhance a few. People will know him best as the guy with the camera at live story events. He specializes in photos of storytellers, and Chester is quite the traveler and finds stories wherever his journeys take him. So he brings us a true story. Help me welcome from Territory Tellers, Oklahoma, A True Story, Rachel by Chester Weems.
Well, thank you, John. I told you I didn't want to have to follow Rutherford, but we'll do what we can. By the way, earlier in the program, someone gave a couple of tech tips. I'm going to give you one. You see a little reflection on my glasses? Here's a way to fix that. You take them off and you put on a pair with no lenses in them. So anyway, that's a thought. So anyway, I don't normally do silly stuff, but today's a little bit different. It's a serious story. It's kind of a well, in some ways, it's kind of a Christmas gift, and that should make sense a little bit later in the story. The little girl was maybe 11, 12 years old, and she was standing in the checkout line at the country grocery store. In front of her at the line, checking out her groceries, was a lady named Rachel. Now, she liked Rachel a lot. Rachel was a really nice lady, small lady, slim and trim and always dressed nice, although you could tell that her clothes were mostly homemade, and occasionally she recognized some of the trim, which she thought she'd seen a flour sack, some of that same kind of material. But she was a nice lady, told her all kinds of stories, gave her advice. But she was there checking out her groceries. And on the other side of the counter was the clerk. And the clerk had been, on his piece of paper, had been writing down what Rachel had purchased. And he'd put the prices on, and he totaled it up, and he wrote the cost there at the bottom of the page. And then he laid the paper in front of Rachel, because this is a time before the automated machines we have today. This is like in the mid-1930s we're talking about. He handed Rachel a pencil. Rachel reached out with her small hand. She took the pencil. She looked down at the piece of paper. She reached down and she made an X at the bottom. The little girl was a little puzzled about that. Rachel stood up, handed the pencil back to the clerk, and the clerk bent over and he wrote, Rachel Richmond, her mark. And for the first time, after knowing Rachel for so long, the little girl realized Rachel couldn't write her name. She did not know how to read or write, and that just did not make sense to her because she told such wonderful stories about all kinds of stuff. And she told them with really interesting accent, which she figured out eventually, and Rachel told about. She told about the stories in an accent from where she grew up in the hills of Kentucky. That's where her family was from, a large family. In fact, her family could actually trace themselves back to Isaac Garrison, who was in the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War. Large family there. But while she was in Kentucky, she married a man that she called her James, and she loved her James. They got married. They had a little farm, and both families in those days, how they would often help, they helped them build a cabin on a little hill. They farmed with horses and mules. The cabin, they all chipped in, but James was a pretty handy carpenter, and he built the cabinetry, and in the kitchen, he built the kitchen table, and he built the chairs, but especially he built, for their living area, small as though it was, 2 oak rocking chairs. And those were the chairs that at the end of the day, when the kids were in bed and the dishes were done, the chores were done, she and her James would sit and they would think about the day, and they'd think about, as many of you, I'm sure, with your loved ones, you think about the dreams of tomorrow, and that's what they would do. And that's the way it was for a long time. Had a couple of kids. And then the conversation started to change a little bit because, well, James's family was starting to have a little problem with another family in that area. And this was a part of the world where sometimes family problems escalated and could get worse and worse. And James had now a split decision here, didn't he? He had to decide, do I stick with my family here in the hills, or do I give priority to my wife and kids and myself? And they talked about that many times. And finally they came to a decision that before he was willing to commit violence, he said, I think we have to move. And Rachel agreed. And so they started gathering up a few items because they knew they couldn't take much with them. They thought they'd go west. They'd heard about this new place they're opening up out west, and maybe there'd be some opportunity there. So one evening, Rachel, she has this kitchen towel that her mother had given her, pretty special. So he picked up a few more little knickknacks that were special to her, and she wrapped them up in that kitchen towel. James gathered up a few tools that he would need, a few hand tools. Rachel gathered a few of the kitchen items, utensils that she would need, packed up some of the kids' clothes, her clothes, James' clothes. And the next morning, she got up, she fixed breakfast, a little extra. She threw a few extra biscuits and some bacon and wrapped it in another piece of cloth, and she sat and waited. James showed up at the front door leading their mule. It was a good mule. It was a mule that could pull that plow really well, or he was a riding mule too. Not all mules were good riding mules, but this was a good one. But he pulled up to the front door, and Rachel said, kids, let's go, it's time to go. And so she walked through the door, and James picked her up and put her on the back of that mule. He picked up the kids, he handed them each the sacks that they had gathered with all their stuff. And she sat there and watched James go back into the house. Now, homes in those days, no electricity, of course, they had interior lighting from what are called coal oil lamps or kerosene lamps, which meant in the house somewhere there's a little can of kerosene. James went and got that can of kerosene, and he walked over to the kitchen table, and he started pouring that kerosene on that kitchen table, and then on those chairs, and then a little under the cabinets that he had built. And then he walked over to those chairs. And she said it was hard. She said she thought she could see a tear one time in James' eyes. But he poured the gasoline or the kerosene anyway on those chairs. He walked out the door, he grabbed the lead on that mule, and went down the hill. She said James never looked back. She said, I did. I looked back as the flames started to spread through the house and up through the roof. And it was as though I could see our dreams going up in smoke. But then I turned my head to my James. And we walked down that hill. We walked to the next town where there's a railroad station. James sold the mule. We got on the train and we went west to this new place called Oklahoma. There we found some land in the middle part of the state, and there we raised our family. We had 2 kids from Kentucky, and then we raised the other 9 there in Oklahoma. Several of the kids, of course, had grown up, had families of their own. But the day after Christmas in 1930, James died. And now we have a widow woman with several kids still at home. The youngest was only 5. WPA helped her a lot and taught her how to sew better and to do some other things, how to survive. And they did. She still had her modest home. And in southeast Oklahoma City now, today, there's a street with her name on it. But this story came and was told later. If you allow me to jump ahead 65 years, let's go to western Oklahoma. On Christmas Day, December 25, 1998, around a kitchen table in a small home out there. And I'll bet a lot of you go home Thanksgiving and Christmas and you have your Christmas dinner, your Thanksgiving dinner, and you sit around, you share family stories, you talk. Well, that's what happened that day. But this day, sitting at the table, there was a note taker. And the lady sitting on the end of the table told that story to the family. And that note taker made all those notes as fast as he could. You see, the note taker, some 65 years ago, was that little girl. Rachel was the mother of the note taker. I was the note taker. Or the little girl was the mother of the note taker. Rachel was the mother of the little girl, my grandmother. And I'm sharing this story with you today because the holidays are coming. And I think you're going to have some opportunities yourselves to sit around the table. And there's going to be a few stories that give you just a little foundation to your own story. And I hope that you can make a few notes yourself to pass those along to some of your family. And I would like to share with you in closing 2 pictures. December 26, 1930, Rachel standing by the cemetery, the grave of my grandfather, her James. And some years later, my grandmother, Rachel Richmond. I don't know when this was taken, and I'm so sorry to say I never knew her well at all. But I think that's a family story that was worthy of being recorded and passed along. Thank you very much for this private moment. Thank you.